Hello and welcome to Ginger Theory. Today we will be talking about the Venezuela situation. So, the Operation Absolute Resolve has been carried out, and Maduro, the president of Venezuela, has been captured by the US, which is illegal under international law. This was a joint operation with the FBI, NSA, NGA, CIA, DEA, and the military. The DEA being a part of this whole Maduro narco-terrorism operation is just for show. They're using the same playbook as they did for Manuel Noriega in Panama in 1989. And it's not at all a coincidence that this whole Maduro operation took place on the 36th anniversary of Noriega's capture. The U.S. has a long history of coups, basically overthrowing governments that don't align with American, Israeli, French, British, its allies' interests, and then they install figures who do. We've done this with Mossadegh, Gaddafi, and Saddam, to name a few, and this isn't even the first time that the CIA was involved in a coup in Venezuela. In 1998, Hugo Chavez, an anti-establishment folk hero at the time, won the presidential election. He campaigned on nationalism, anti-corruption, helping the poor, and nationalizing their oil reserves, which directed the revenue towards social programs that benefited the citizens. So Chavez was elected, and he restricted foreign oil companies, and Western corporations were no longer profiting billions off of their oil. He redistributed unused land from large estates to the people, and he was supported by the poor and rural populations, which obviously made him an enemy to the upper class and the elite. This nationalization posed a huge problem to U.S. oil companies, as Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves. The oil companies that were affected by this were ones like ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, Chevron, BP, Total Energies, Halliburton, Schulberger, Baker Hughes. And it was during this time that Venezuela used their nationalized oil wealth to strengthen their alliance with Russia, China, and Iran, aka America's direct adversaries positioned now near its southern border. So the U.S. was hatching a plan to overthrow Chavez. You see, when a country has control of its own national resources, they then have political and economical leverage. This threatens U.S. interests. And if one country were to successfully nationalize, what is there to stop every country from following suit with their own resources? Private interests would lose billions. So Chavez started appointing people to lead a state-led oil company in 2001. He increased state control of the economy, which diminished corporations in the private sector. And during this time, the private corporations who owned the private major medias were broadcasting overwhelmingly anti-Chavez material. Bankers were trying everything from civilian unrest to backstabbing within his own cabinet to try and overthrow him. The CIA had backed resistance movements and opposition leaders, including having meetings with them, making this an inorganic movement, of course. And all of this buildup led to the Miraflores incident at the presidential palace, which there was a manufactured mob, basically outside of the presidential palace, and a shootout took place. So the private media edited the footage to make it look like Chavez's men were shooting at unarmed, peaceful protesters, even though they were actually shooting at snipers and armed individuals. It's also been widely noted that the snipers on the roofs were literally shooting at both sides. A classic government play. So this attack was used to turn Chavez's men against him. They literally broadcasted the doctored footage all across Venezuela, and people were outraged. So Chavez was arrested, and an acting president was put into place. He just so happened to be the head of the Business Federation, Pedro Carmona. The same day, the White House was blaming the governmental change on Chavez's violence and recognizing the new government as legitimate. So this swift decree literally provided further proof that the U.S. knew it was going to happen. Carmona immediately tried to and successfully reversed Chavez's policies, basically returning the country to a private interest haven. He got rid of all the elected institutions. He fired all Supreme Court justices. He dissolved the elected Congress. He suspended the Chavez Constitution, even though that was majorly supported by voters. He dissolved the Electoral Council, and then he claimed that there would be an election in a year when the time is right, very Hunger Games style, and that he would control who could run, basically. So the people saw this overthrow of Chavez policy as the elite taking their power back. So Carmona literally did all of this within just 47 hours, because it was just 47 hours, meaning the time that it took for the mass protests and military rebellion to then demand Chavez be reinstated back into power. So after this, Carmona fled to Colombia, and Chavez held office until 2013. Then you have Maduro coming to power. Maduro kept the nationalized oil. He aligned with Russia, China, Iran, and traded outside of the dollar system. He was heavily attacked by the propaganda machine, similar to Chavez. He removed elected members who were treasonous or were bought out by the special interests, and he was called a monster for this, even though removing the institutions that were afflicted is exactly what Carmona did, and the U.S. praised him. Yet, when Maduro does it, he's a dictator? Yeah, because the U.S. doesn't actually give a damn about civilians living under oppression, under a dictatorship. They only care if the dictatorship serves their corporations and their interests. They don't care. The U.S. has been trying to take over Venezuela for years. The attempt in 2002 was just one of many. The election in 2018 in Venezuela was absolutely rigged by the United States, as Guaido, the opposition, was a U.S.-backed puppet. Maduro banned opposition leaders from running due to corruption, so there were only about 50% of voters that turned out. So Maduro was declared the winner on January 10th, 2025. Then the opposition's leader, Juan Guaido, declared himself as acting president. He was previously the president of the National Assembly. So then you have this rogue actor who then gets recognized by the U.S. within 60 minutes of declaration, and 60 other countries recognized him as well. Although Maduro stayed in power because Guaido couldn't get the country nor the military to turn against Maduro. Factually, Maduro is an authoritarian with a horribly mismanaged economy, but the U.S. is invading Venezuela for a few reasons, and not one of them is to protect the people. I don't think Maduro is some benevolent politician. I personally hold the belief that almost all politicians are guilty until proven innocent. But what I am saying is that the U.S. doesn't care about any civilian interests. They don't care about the people of Venezuela, just like they don't care about the people of Iran or the people of Gaza or the people of the United States. The U.S. has killed over 500,000 civilians within 2 years. I promise you the U.S. government does not give a fuck about anyone or anything except money, Jewish Zionists, and elite interests. And it's surely not just a coincidence that the opposition's leader, Machado, is a hardcore Zionist who will literally sell the entire country of Venezuela to the US, UK, France, and Israel. Maria Corina Machado was barred from running for office against Maduro in 2023 for the 2024 election due to major corruption allegations, including treason. She supported US sanctions against Venezuela as a Venezuelan statesman. Weird. In 2002, Machado founded a civil organization called Sumate 3 months before the attempted overthrow of Chavez. It was an opposition organizing group. Machado was present during the coup at the presidential palace, and she was one of the few people who signed the Carmona decree that overturned all of Chavez's actions and abolished his government. In 2004, her organization then led a petition for another recall of Chavez. But of course, Chavez won as the voters chose not to recall him. And members of Sumate, including Machado, were charged with treason and conspiracy for not just trying to overthrow the president, but for receiving financial support for their activities from the US National Endowment for Democracy. In Venezuela, political parties are strictly prohibited from accepting foreign funding. This was yet another violation that Machado had under her belt. She met with President Bush in the White House in May of 2005, the first Venezuelan political figure to meet with Bush. And this was during her treason charges, where she's literally meeting with U.S. figures, even though she was accused of working on behalf of them. So this was, of course, a slap in the face to Chavez, the acting president of Venezuela. The treason charges were inevitably dropped around 2006 due to U.S. manufactured international backlash, basically threatening that if they went through with the charges, international consequences would follow. So today, Venezuelans are suffering, yes. But neither Maduro, nor Machado, nor the U.S. is going to be the one to grant them their freedom and less suffering. The U.S. has proven to be a false savior, an angel of light appearing to chaotic nations only to further imbue them with destruction in favor of its allies and its interests. Also, something that's crucial to why the U.S. is constantly involved in coups and why it's involved in Venezuela is because countries that nationalize their oil reserves oppose the post-World War II economic order. Literally a policy designed by the U.S. and its allies. The policy entails, number one, the U.S. dollar is the global reserve currency, also called the petrodollar system. Western corporations extract resources from developing countries. IMF and the World Bank enforce structural adjustments, which is privatization and open markets that are easily controlled. Countries that comply get investments and aid. The rules of this policy: you must trade oil in dollars. You must allow Western corporation access to resources, aka no resource nationalism allowed. You cannot align with U.S. adversaries, and you cannot inspire other countries to follow your example with individuality or nationalism. Examples of country who went down the path of resource nationalism, which is basically asking yourself, why would we continue to let foreign companies profit from our resources, meanwhile we're just getting royalties? That would be Venezuela with their oil, Bolivia with their lithium, and Iran with their oil. I like to think of it as the mob being the U.S. and its allies who offer peace and stability and safety, but only if you submit to their conditions, the conditions being complete economic rape. And if you say no, they're obviously your enemy. Countries that do not obey the post-World War II economic order are subsequently punished, which we can see with Iran and Venezuela. So Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's vice president, has been sworn in as interim president since his capture. She holds the same Chavez-era beliefs about nationalism and keeping private interests out of Venezuela. However, Trump has explicitly stated intentions to have U.S. companies fix and profit from Venezuela's oil. He's claiming that the oil was stolen under the 1970s nationalization. In reality, they didn't steal shit. The worldwide thieves are astoundingly the United States, partnered with the UK, France, and Israel. So let's talk about some responses to this whole operation. J.D. Vance. Hey, if there's one thing about me, it's that I'm going to rip James Donald Bowman a new asshole. So J.D. Vance tweeted some bullshit. He said, the president offered multiple off-ramps, but was very clear through this process that the drug trafficking must stop and the stolen oil must be returned to the U.S. In another tweet, he goes on to say, And PSA, for everyone saying this was illegal, Maduro had multiple indictments in the United States for narco-terrorism. You don't get to avoid justice for drug trafficking in the United States just because you live in Caracas. Okay, so they're pushing narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, but also stolen oil and somehow evasion of U.S. capture. Okay, so just another example of how J.D. Vance, James Donald Bowman, is a scam artist and a lying propagandist piece of shit. So Vance is a shell of a man. He's not a man. I've never heard one unique thought or opinion come out of his Palantir-owned mouth. Vance literally has no beliefs. None of these people do. They only believe in money. They'll say anything, any buzzwords to get people riled up. The current administration's buzzwords are extremist, woke right, woke left, trans agenda, narco drug trafficker, anti-American. None of this is real. These are talking points that they push to the public to gain or diminish support for a particular cause. They wanted everyone to stop talking about all the inconsistencies surrounding Charlie Kirk's assassination plot, so they hounded on the trans agenda idea, which was their plan all along. I mean, they needed something to get conservative and Republican voters back on their side after all of this division that Israel has caused. And what better way to have voters unite against the so-called woke left and woke right by killing a leading conservative figure by an alleged Tyler Robinson, who just so happened to be dating a trans individual, and then killed Charlie the exact moment that he talked about trans shootings. So that's just an example of like there are way bigger things going on and they just try to trip you up with these little buzzwords. So back to JD Vance. Vance literally got his start from, Peter Thiel, but Peter Thiel also helped him publish his book Hillbilly Elegy. He claims that's a memoir of his life growing up. In the book, he claims that the opioid epidemic devastated his family and his community. The Sackler family is personally responsible for the opioid epidemic. They own Purdue Pharma, and they single-handedly pushed OxyContin as non-addictive, and they marketed it as less prone to abuse than other drugs, despite knowing its extremely high potential for abuse. This company contributed more to any other factor to the national opioid crisis, which has killed more than 1 million Americans since it started in 1999. They have paid billions in settlements and yet haven't spent a single day in jail. These are real drug lords being allowed to operate within the U.S. and destroy countless American lives like the ones that J.D. Vance writes about. He's the vice president of the United States. If he wanted to change the drug situation, he could. His best friend is literally Peter Thiel, one of the richest and most powerful men in the world. But he's too busy trying to convince dumb, uninformed Americans to focus on a Venezuelan politician that has committed maybe half the crimes of this administration. So, yeah. And it's so funny. On December 1st, 2025, so last month, Trump pardoned Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president of Honduras, who was convicted on U.S. soil of drug trafficking charges. Hernandez was responsible for facilitating the trafficking of over 400 tons of cocaine into the U.S. from at least 2004 to 2022. Prosecutors described him as running a narco state where he worked with major cartels like the Sinaloa cartel. He then used this drug money to manipulate Honduran elections in 2013 and 2017. And this is all provided in court documents. The U.S. authorities literally said that the case represented one of the largest and most violent drug trafficking conspiracies in history, with Hernandez at its center. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison by U.S. courts, and Donald Trump let him out. J.D. Vance, of course, had nothing to say about this. I mean, how do you even stand up straight with no spine, J.D.? Trump said that he pardoned Hernandez because he was the victim of a setup by the Biden administration. He then says that Hernandez was unfairly targeted by being president of a country where cartels operated, stating that if somebody sells drugs in that country, that doesn't mean you arrest the president. That's exactly what he did with Maduro. So, okay. Also, it's very funny. Literal Honduran authorities have been trying to apprehend Hernandez for their own separate lists of charges, and Trump just pardoned him. And he's literally evading arrest. So, once again, Trump's words mean nothing. He doesn't have an allegiance to the truth, to the American people. He just has an allegiance to corporate interests, the global elite, Israel, and his God, which is money. So, yeah, it's been a crazy few days. Cuba and Colombia are heating up, so I'm sure one of them will be next for a U.S.-backed coup. Russia, Iran, and China are obviously displeased with the U.S.'s actions in Venezuela, so we'll see if this doesn't escalate into World War III. And in retaliation, China will most likely take Taiwan. Obviously, that's been in the works for a long time. This whole taking of Venezuela and then Cuba and then Colombia, it's all part of the technocrats' agenda, but combined with like the greater Israel project. See, Elon Musk was super happy about the arrest of Maduro because he'll obviously benefit from the U.S. taking over Venezuela's economy for corporate overlords like him to then systematically rape the country. But also because Elon's grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, was a leader under Technocracy Incorporated. This is where the whole technocracy idea gained footing in America. This is also where Curtis Yarvin drew his inspiration from for the Dark Enlightenment tyrannical movement. Remember, Yarvin is popular among Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance. So, Technocracy Incorporated was an organization founded in 1933 in New York City as a replacement for capitalism during the Great Depression. It advocated for the smartest in a society to be its leaders, making decisions based off of what was the most scientific or intelligent move. The whole movement basically removes the human hand on the steering wheel. It's no longer what humanity desires. It's what the scientists, engineers, tech overlords, and their machines deem to be the most intelligent or scientific way to govern humanity. This also includes things like energy certificates based off of an individual's energy usage and production. So basically, carbon taxes. This also includes things like energy certificates based off of an individual's energy usage and energy production. So this will also bring in carbon taxes, which we already have in a lot of places. Carbon taxes based off of how much you consume, based off of heating your home. You'll have as much energy certificates as the system thinks you deserve. It's not based off of anything. It's based off of what they think. So with these types of certificates and energy restrictions, this would mean, for example, a grown man would receive something like 3 ounces of steak. He would not be allowed red meat again until they decided that he had worked hard enough to offset the energy consumption. And that's just in the beginning stages. There would eventually become a time where the mass population would not be allowed to have such things, such as meat, dairy, or any animal products. That's where you have like the Soylent Green type thing coming in, where they would feed us other human beings. And like in Snowpiercer, where they eat meal bars that are made of cockroaches and other insects. So this whole Technocracy Inc. movement became a little less popular around 1948 because of the New Deal and like the end of the war and everything. But it's still an active movement today, right? Like we see this actively being held as a belief in Silicon Valley overlords, Curtis Yarvin, J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel. Now, of course, this technocracy system just perpetuates the same elitist world that we currently live in. It was originally designed to kind of alleviate the Great Depression, but it was disastrously flawed, as it's just continuing the same oppression, but on a grandiose scale combined with modern technology. So, Technocracy Incorporated, their main idea was a proposed continental administrative unit called the Technate. Many may have seen Nick Fuentes' post about it, like the day of the invasion, but basically the countries that would be included in the grand technocracy plan would be Canada, the US, Greenland, Central America, the Caribbean, and parts of South America, Venezuela. Of course, since most of the world has bent the knee to Israel, this technocracy plan will combine the greater Israel agenda with this administrative continent. Because don't forget, they're planning to redesign Gaza as a smart city with digital ID and a technocratic governance. So that's going to be all for me today. I'm slowly starting to do more podcast type content. So hopefully I can start doing this on a daily basis. But yeah, lots to look forward to. This is a very bleak time, but there's lots of hope to have in the face of these villains' debauchery. I'll be back soon with another video. And until then, this has been my Ginger Theory.